Thank you very much. Honored guests and the Honorable Thomas Lukasik, congratulations on what you're about to get later. And graduands, when Dr. Crispin asked if I would do this, I took a lot of time, about 6 seconds, to say yes. I've been surrounded by men of the cloth for the last 3 days, and I'll leave the preaching about religion to them, but I'll preach about two of my favorite topics, and that's social entrepreneurship and giving back. So where does it start? It starts, for me, in a small town in southern Ontario called Brantford, Ontario. And Brantford, Ontario, as you might know, used to have my sign on. That's coming in was my town, until this young skinny kid named Gretzky had a 20-year lucky streak and mine came down, his went up. And being the second famous guy from Brantford is a lot like being like Herald of Nazareth. It's been done and it doesn't have the same ring to it. I'm also one of those, it's a very rare thing, but like most of you, I was born in a hospital, but then I was immediately taken to a funeral home. So I'm one of those going to go out the way I came in. Obviously I didn't die, but I lived and grew up in a funeral home. And I think that's what sort of made me turn into what I've become, and I didn't really realize at the time why or how. But when you grow up in a funeral home, it's a very unique environment. And back then it was different. Funeral homes were open 24/7, and you learn about the humanity of the community when something bad happens, like a death. You also learn how to be quiet, because we lived upstairs, and you also learn to hate the smell of cut flowers and organ music. So, although I like Inagata David, I was kind of hoping the organist would give us a couple of that. Also in the funeral business back then, it was not unusual to also be the ambulance company. And that's what I learned, that not only was I learning about being social and caring, but I knew I had an entrepreneurial flair when I asked my dad, how much do we get for an ambulance call versus a funeral? He smacked me in the head, and it was different time, different era. You get away with that then. But I always was thinking about that part of the business. And cool thing back then was, you know, the Addams Family was on, and the Munsters, and if you think you get picked on at school when you were a kid, imagine the guy who lives in a funeral home. But we got to go to school in great cars, fabulous cars, big Lincoln cars, amazing. And again, a different time, a different era, but that was an era of the drive-in movies. And my dad would take my sister and I and my mom to the drive-in, and he'd back in with the service car, which is like a hearse except not as fancy. Throw a mattress in there and we'd watch the movie from the back. But again, you know, back then we had a radio-equipped service car, and we got a call one night at the drive-in, and back then you could have adult beverages at the drive-in, different time, different era, and I think my dad was a little half in the bag, and off we went to the hospital to pick up a body. And the service car has wheels and runners and like a conveyor in the back. And my dad didn't tie the body down very good. Brantford is a hilly place near our funeral home. My sister and I were jammed in the front, and as Dad went down the hill, so came the body right on top of us. We thought it was hilarious. My mom was gone. She jumped out the door. Didn't find it quite as amusing. But again, you know, it taught me a whole bunch of things living in a funeral home like that. And when you know, when you heard all the you know, the wailing and the crying and that kind of stuff coming upstairs, I knew I was in a special place. And I also learned about the giving back part, because one morning my mom had flaming red hair, and I remember coming out for breakfast and most of it was gone. I didn't know what had happened. But the mayor's wife had been in a terrible car accident, and my dad needed some red hair to help make this woman look good for the funeral. And my mom gave it up, and you know, sort of gift of the Magi thing, very, very weird. But I learned again, you know, that if you want to make a difference, you have to give back. And so I never forgot that. And again, a fun place to live too. It doesn't sound like it, you wouldn't think if you're in a home, but every Sunday morning when I would get ready for church, my dad would say, "Lay down, I got to tie your tie." Yeah, you got it. I was worried. I didn't know if that one would work or not, but So for years, yeah. He would fall out of closets, try to scare us and everything else. But again, that's where I sort of learned the compassion. I remember when President Kennedy was assassinated, and he had the most amazing bronze casket I'd ever seen. And I said to my dad then, you know, why don't we buy one and let poor people put their family in there, and then we'll bury them in something else. And he smacked me in the head. Went on. And ironically, they're doing that kind of thing now. The other thing, though, when I found out that I had a social conscience was Brantford, Ontario is famous also, not just for Gretzky, but it's the Six Nations Reserve is there. And my dad had the contract to bury the natives. I'm not that old, but Brantford was a different town, and the picture of me getting my first haircut, in the background on the mirror says no Indians. That's not that long ago in Canada. The worst part for me, though, was seeing that my dad would have to bury the natives in the rough boxes. The rough boxes are what caskets come in. Not very flattering. And we couldn't have the bodies in the funeral home. So my dad would have to take them back to the reserve in a rough box and try and make them look good. And I thought that's just wrong, totally wrong. And I didn't dwell on it, but I think that's part of what's changed me over the years. So the funeral home business never changes too, in terms of people always associate you with that. And for those of you who know, Wild Bill Hunter was founder of the Oilers, and I've worked with the Oilers for the last 30 years. And when Wild Bill was dying, he came to me and said that we would produce a big funeral. He was like, for those of you who don't know, he was like a Carney. He was like Cecil B. DeMille. And so anyway, he said, where should we have it? I said, well, what church do you go to? Well, I don't go to church. So he said, you know what? Get me that one that Gretz was married in. So I said, wow, Bill, you know, that's the basilica. That's like as high as you can get for the Catholics, and you aren't Catholic. That ain't going to happen. He said, make it happen, make it happen. So he was in the palliative care ward at the Grey Nuns, and he used to phone me every day. And this one day he phoned me and he said, urgent, get over here right away. So I thought he was dying. I drove across town, got to the hospital, and I walked to the room, and there's a priest standing over Bill. I go, holy jeez, like he's actually converted in like 4 days. This is amazing. Anyway, he peeks out from behind the priest and he goes, we got the venue. Do you believe that? We got the venue. So I recognized the priest. He was our chaplain for the Oilers, and I said, what gives? Like, how does this happen? You know, my dad, when he died, he was divorced and couldn't have a funeral in a Catholic church. And now we're having Wild Bill Hunter having a funeral in the church who's never been in a Catholic church, maybe except for Gretz's wedding. He told me that things were changing, my son, and that I should understand. Somehow I think it had to do with checks not bouncing and the ability to maybe have a high-profile funeral there. Anyway, that's sort of what changed my life and what made me sort of become what I have been and am and will be, I think, forever. I have a philosophy about giving back in the business world, and when you know, when you think about it, you can do it for a couple of reasons. Some people don't want to do anything charitable. I don't understand those people, but that's the reality. They don't. My philosophy is that healthy consumers, healthy people, you know, will make your business thrive. And healthy employees are happier employees. And when I think about if one of my staff's young daughter finds herself pregnant, I'm happy that I've given to the Terra Foundation to help her through that pregnancy and raise that child. When some of my staff have a child diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, I'm happy that we've supported them, and on and on and on. And it doesn't hurt to do that. It feels good, and your business will grow. And there's not enough. I didn't know what a social entrepreneur was until the U of A called me one day and said I was a social entrepreneur of the year. I'm still not really clear on what it is, but apparently I am one. I know that my staff like working for Quickcard because we do that kind of thing. And I can buy billboards or radio ads or that kind of stuff, but I'd rather help the community. And that's just part of what I do. I know a few years ago, when my wife was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and I called in every favor I could, even called Thomas's old boss. And I didn't feel bad about it because I knew that I had done a lot of work for the Cancer Board and raised money for cancer. But I wondered about people who never do that kind of thing, how they might feel after. And I have to reach down here and pull it out, but somewhere I have it. Shortly after my wife passed away, I got diagnosed with the exact same cancer. It was really weird. It's like they're not contagious or anything, but anyway, American Express has a saying, you don't leave home without the card. This little red card is your card that gets you in and out of the cancer clinic. And when I went in, I said, I've come to make a withdrawal because I've made a lot of deposits. And I don't feel bad about it. That's the difference. I don't understand how people don't give back, but there are those who don't. Now I've changed my focus a little bit, and a bit actually, and I worry about, here we just had Osama bin Laden killed, and I'm doing work in Afghanistan and Iraq and Timor, and it's a place with no hope. And you graduates are among the lucky few. And that's another reason why I came to talk to you, because I'm sending you out on a mission. I talked to Gerald, there's 7 or 8% of you are the only ones who go to university. That means you got to carry the heavy lifting for 92% of the rest of us. You got to give back when you get the chance. If you have any doubts that the Taliban are evil people, I'll tell you a story about one of our managers in Afghanistan. She was giving her husband a kiss goodbye in the morning. He worked for a big courier company, and he had caught the Taliban sending drugs out in the containers. And he had had the same 2 bodyguards for 6 years. Anyway, she gave him a kiss goodbye on the doorstep. The car went about 100 yards down the road. The 2 bodyguards got out of the car, shot him, and killed him in the back seat. Because the Taliban had gotten their families and said, you kill him or we're going to kill your families. If you can imagine getting up every morning with no hope, no chance to go to university, no chance to have a job, what else are you going to do but become a terrorist or be mad at the world? So we have to help them in a different way. With all due respect to if there's any Americans here, I don't mean any disrespect, but it's an interesting economic model. You go in, you blow everything up, and then you bring your contractors over from the US to rebuild it. It's an interesting model. Doesn't work. So I'm working with the Peace Dividend Trust, and what we're doing is teaching locals how to bid on contracts and how to become employed, become entrepreneurs. And we recently received an award from Obama from the G20 prize because we've created 120,000 jobs in Afghanistan. That's going to make a difference, not blowing up buildings. So that's what we have to do. I don't know what else I can tell you about being a social entrepreneur, but I can tell you that it feels good, and I'm happy to do it. I want you all to do it. It's just an amazing feeling to know you're helping and you're making something better. And there's a lot of rich guys who don't. But I recently joined up with Bill Gates' foundation, and he's convincing, not me, like billionaire, really rich guys, to give it all back. And he's got an amazing stable of people doing that, and they are going to make a difference. So that's sort of how I became what I became. Hopefully it inspires you a little bit. Again, I've been surrounded by men of cloth and women of the clergy, and they speak really good. And it brought me to thinking about parables. So I'm going to leave you with one, which I've had to change the words a little bit because I'm usually used to speaking to hockey guys. So, but this little bird was flying along. It was only a few weeks ago, as a matter of fact. Remember when that storm came in out of nowhere? And the bird was instantly covered with ice, and when crashing to the ground, couldn't fly, and was just laying there and was just feeling horrible for itself. And the horse comes by and takes a look down and says, oh, what am I going to do? And at that point, he wondered why God gave him hoofs and not opposable thumbs. Not much he could do. He couldn't pick the little bird up. So he dropped a load of manure on the bird. The bird says, well, my day's getting better. But the bird all of a sudden feels like, hey, this is pretty warm, this is nice, and starts to melt the ice off, and bird peeps his head out of the pile of manure and starts chirping for joy. He's just absolutely thrilled. Unfortunately, a farm cat was going by, dug him out the rest of the way and ate him. So there's 3 lessons here. No, honest, there is. The first lesson is, not everyone who dumps manure on you is your enemy. Not everyone who digs you out of manure is your friend. And if you're in manure up to your ears, better to keep your mouth shut. Congratulations, graduates. I hope you do great. Thank you.